everybody. Welcome to sunny and warm St. Cloud. We really appreciate y'all being here. I'm from Bemidji and Renee's from Duluth, so yeah, this is warm. So we appreciate you all being here. I'm Joe Chupesky, your System Plan Coordinator with the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission. Renee?
Good morning. Again, welcome. Thanks for coming. Renee Matson from Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission, as Joe said, out of Duluth. And we're going to have a great day. It's very interactive, so as you have questions as we go through the entire day, just stop us, ask those questions. We've got great presenters. Thanks all of you for being here. It's an opportunity for us to get a lot of questions answered during the panel discussion, as well as having the DNR grant staff here and Kelly from SHPO as well. So thanks a lot.
Yes, as Renee said, our agenda today is actually fairly simple, but it's packed with information. So we will be throwing a lot at you today. As Renee said, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. We'll try and get you a microphone so you can ask those questions, especially during the panel presentation this afternoon. We've got great panelists lined up for you. Hopefully we can all learn a lot and just keep that project preparation going for all of us here today. So thank you very much. We will be doing introductions here in a little bit. After introductions, Renee and I will cover some of the GMRPTC grant contracting, some of the stuff you need to know outside of the DNR contract, some of the things that we require, having to do with marketing and some of the tools that we provide you for that. Then our DNR staff will join us to talk about the grant contract list, that famous list in our application materials that talks about all the stuff you need to do before you get the contract, which is why we're here today. And then after lunch, we will get into the panel discussion. And like I said, it's going to be a lot of fun, great, packed with information, and we're excited to let some other people do some of the talking. So that's the highlight for us, I think. So.
And there is a seat in the front. We still have a seat here up front and over here as well. So please come on up if you're looking for a seat.
Appreciate you coming. So one of the things that the Commission has been working hard on over the last couple of years, it's been a year since we adopted our value statement for inclusion, and for so many of you, thank you for joining us this past year for our accessibility workshops, our online workshops. They were greatly attended, and we really appreciate not only you joining us to make sure that we have a good crowd, but also that you learn a little bit more about how to be more accessible for all of our park users. So, Renee, you want to talk about this in our program there a little bit?
Yeah, as Joe said, we were lucky that we were able to do 4 forums this year with Bill Botten, who is an amazing resource for us on accessibility. Bill was at the U.S. Access Board right from the beginning when all of the language was being written, and he was terrific for all of those of you who may have been participating in his forums. How many, in fact, here in the room were able to take in one of those forums? Great. He's awesome, he's amazing, and unfortunately he's really stuck on retiring this year, so it's a bummer for us. He told us last year he really was trying to retire. He is one of those people that flunked retirement early on. But this year he's really making more of a dedicated effort to take time for himself. But he did turn us over to one of his long-term contacts in the industry, who he's worked with for many, many years. And we're in discussions with her, and we hope to be able to continue those forums with Jennifer in the future, and also have her available, as Bill was, for plan review and discussion, and just helping us do all the best that we can. Because as he was always quick to say, it's not about one type of inclusion, it's for everybody, because we're all going to age, we're all going to have issues, and so it's universal access. And so don't lose hope, we haven't. We'll be offering those forums again every quarter with just someone new. So thanks for your attention to that.
Just to give you a little overview, I think everybody here knows about the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission pretty well, because you're all a part of our designated system, although there's a couple of new staff here, I know. What we're going to talk about, one of the things that we have, the reason we're here today is to talk about what goes into the preparation for contracting with the state for your grant. And part of that is also our agreement with you. What are the things that we are looking for as a part of that process? So we'll talk about that. I've talked to several of you about a couple of new grant opportunities that we have that we're hoping some of you can make good use of with our Access and Inclusion grants and our Environmental Archaeological Opportunity Grant. And finally, we'll also talk about this next grant application cycle, which is opening up starting April 1st. So some good stuff coming up here.
So in addition to the contract that you have with the DNR, who is our fiscal agent for these contracts, so that's why we handed off, the grants are actually awarded from Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission through the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Awards grants. So it gets a little confusing sometimes. That's why a couple of years ago we came up with this handy-dandy cheat sheet of what we need from you on the GMRPTC side. So if you've got the paper that says FY 2027 grant awardee obligations, they're pretty simple. There's only 7 things. So they'll go pretty quickly, but it's just to call out when you get a hold of us and when you call the DNR. First of all, we'd like your acknowledgement when you get a grant and we send out the information and we say congratulations and here's a press release. And by the way, everyone did a great job this year, so thank you for doing that. It's important that the commission is recognized, not because we strive for recognition or we want applause or any of that sort of thing. It's because in a few short years, the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment is going to be up for reauthorization. Greater Minnesota is one of 3 entities who receives funding to award grants in the Parks and Trails Fund. Nothing's carved in stone about this continuing, so we want to make sure that people understand when they come to your park or trail and they see those great improvements that are happening with this wonderful tax that Minnesotans back in 2008 decided would be a really good thing, if you recall, during a very difficult economic time, and said, yeah, let's tax each other, let's tax ourselves so that we can improve parks and trails, clean water, outdoor heritage, and arts and culture. So it's important that you acknowledge this grant came from Legacy through Greater Minnesota, just so that we can continue being recognized and included in that fund in future years, so we can continue making huge investments across the state of Minnesota. Second, also goes back to it that it's awarded through the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. Because it's been so many years ago, people don't really remember voting for it. They don't really know what it is. It's just that thing that happens, and you hear about it on the news when particularly the Arts Council is promoting something, because they have just a lot more grants going out there. But the DNR, Metropolitan Council, and Greater Minnesota have done some amazing, amazing projects throughout the state. So we want to continue to get that out in front of people, because in 2032, it's going to be on the ballot again for reauthorization, and we hope that everyone feels positively about what these amazing dollars have been doing. So every fall, you get an email from Jenny or Sarah and Charlie at some point, asking how your grant is doing, how is the project going. We ask that you respond to that pretty quickly. This is something that they're required to do, and it provides helpful information to everybody if you're having some issues with a grant, so that we can address that early on. Which also goes to point 4, which is if you're having an issue with something, 3 years is a short time. And some of these projects are very complicated and take a long time to even get a contract for, because there's a lot of moving pieces, right? So if it's a real simple contract, that may go quickly, but a more complicated contract, you may run into some issues that require some conversation, and sometimes it might require a project scope change. Dollars came up shorter than you thought, the project has to be rerouted for whatever reasons, or in some circumstances that have happened, you have extra dollars because it was a really good bidding environment when you went out, and your estimates were a little bit higher than your bids came in. So those are all things we need to know about in advance, so that we can take steps to ensure that those dollars can be spent, or a project can be changed to change the scope, so that if you run short of dollars, the project can still happen. We just have to have those conversations. So keep us informed so that everyone knows what's happening with the projects, and there aren't any surprises as you get towards the end of those 3 years. Many of you saw our logo sign that was out at the counter. That is different than the beautiful Legacy Amendment logo sign that you are required to have on projects as required by the authorization around that Legacy Amendment. Because we want people to understand that this is another system, and Greater Minnesota has 84 at this point, regionally designated parks and trails. It has nothing to do right now with whether or not you've had funding, but we'd like everyone who visits your park or trail to know that this is part of the Greater Minnesota system. We're working on better web information and better ways of getting people moving around to all of the different facilities. So we do require you to have this sign posted. It's free. I know people picked up quite a few of them today because they're gone, so that's terrific. We've been handing them out for the last 2 years, so good news. But this does need to be posted. As you do your project, as your project comes together, please share with us the photos of the project. Every year we have people saying, how come so-and-so is on the cover of your annual report? How come that project's on the inside? Well, we can only publish the photos that we have. So I'm happy to have you send me all kinds of project photos. It can be at groundbreaking, it can be midway through the project. It doesn't need to be at the end. Share those photos and we have that much more to share in our annual report, on our website, and when we're talking with legislators about what projects are happening. That's really, really helpful for us to have.
And just so you know, Renee especially loves sharing vault toilet pictures. She's got a collection going, so don't be shy.
Somebody about pictures of their kids or their dogs on their phone. I got ball toilets. True. And then finally, staff changes happen. So as those changes happen in your organization, please get into the portal and change that contact information and your designation and funding information so that we can continue to update you with timely information and that doesn't get lost. And that we are aware of what changes are being made so you can have all of the information we need to get to you in a timely fashion as well. So it's really pretty simple, nothing hard, just a reminder when you're doing this to recognize us, post the signs, and send us photos, really. Thanks.
Next up, if we could invite our DNR Parks and Trails grant contract staff, Sarah and Jenny, up to join us. And just quickly cover, we're going to go into this in depth this afternoon as a part of the panel. Looks like Jenny has been selected. Oh, both of you are coming up. Wasn't sure if one of you was going to be sacrificial or not. So,
I offered, but she said she would come up.
Yes, we really appreciate all your partnership and helping us to manage these grants and really do a good job. You really do a great job working with all of our partners here to make sure they're successful. And this checklist is a big part of what you end up working with them on. So tell us a little bit about it, knowing that we'll cover a lot more this afternoon. Give them an intro.
Okay. You want to do the checklist first?
Sure. Okay. Hello, everyone. Nice to see familiar faces. So this is the grant checklist that we need, and it's all documents that we have to have before we can issue your grant contract with the DNR. So you'll get your award letter and notification from Greater Minnesota, and then we'll send a congrats email, we'll send a reimbursement email, and we'll send in a checklist that has all of this information. And that's all the information that we need from the DNR side for our requirements to issue the contract that has been awarded. And so we're going to go through all of this in a lot of detail later. But this is something that we work with Joe and Renee on regularly to make sure that it's updated in the application material. So hopefully none of this is coming as a surprise by the time you get to the award. But the first is the required documents for a pre-award risk assessment. This is a new requirement that we just started doing last year. This is part of the ongoing mitigation efforts against fraud within the state of Minnesota for grant agreements. So it's pretty painless and simple, I think, but just know if you've had awards in the past that this is a new requirement. So just keep that in mind. The next is all related to the SHPO process, which I will save for Kelly later since she is the expert. But the main thing to note is that we do require SHPO approval before we can issue a grant contract or have any ground disturbance for the project. The Natural Heritage Information System, this is part of a review process that goes through the DNR, and this is part of making sure that we're all good in terms of environmental resources, so any potential impacts to species, plants, sensitive plants, things like that. If applicable, we'll also need water and wetland permits. So if you don't have any water or wetland activity, this is not applicable, but we just ask that you go to there's a source on the DNR where you can like search for wetlands in your area and your project and see if that's relevant. If you're working along water, obviously that's a little bit more clear cut. But, and then we put the environmental assessment checklist here for a reason, because all of the resources above should be feeding into your environmental assessment. This is a checklist that we have that looks at all impacts to water, cultural resources, amongst a whole lot of other things. So all the steps above will be feeding into that checklist. So don't be surprised if you get a checklist back and you have answer the question about no impacts to cultural resources, but we still have an ongoing survey. We're like, wait a minute, how do we know that if we're doing a survey? So we might ask you to go back and fill that out later. EQB is for trail specific only, as is the land approval certification. And then we do require approvals on campground plans. This is primarily to double check we're meeting accessibility and health regulations in the campground plan. So if you are doing campground work, that will be an additional step that we'll ask. Otherwise, not applicable.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Okay, Jenny and
got their own microphone. One
Oh,
for you
sweet.
and one for you.
Jenny and I thought this would be a great time to hijack the agenda and add something.
Go for it.
So this year we have 3 DNR representatives here. We have Charlie Davis, who's new with us. Charlie just started a few months ago as our grant specialist. So we are now fully staffed in our grants unit for these grants that we manage. So there's going to be a little bit of a transition that will be happening. Up until now, I've been managing the trail projects that are awarded through the commission. We're going to be moving those over to Charlie. And then Jenny and I will both be managing park projects, and we will be by region. We have split it into 4 ways, and I will have northwest, southeast.
Yes.
We'll let you know if your grant manager is changing, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that we'll have some transitioning happening. We are still all working together, so if you reach out to one, you've reached out to all of us. We can get you pointed in the right direction and also just serve as a general resource for you. But just wanted to take this opportunity to explain why Charlie is here, and some of you may be impacted by that and may want to go introduce yourselves. Just say it that way.
Right here. Hi, Charlie.
Who's there?
Did we miss anything, Joe?
I think you got it all, unless there's,
Question.
questions people may have at this point, questions about the process, or even just a general question as to whether a step might be applicable to you. That's usually the question I get before
Great.
we even turn it over to them, is what parts of this am I going to have to do? How do people find that out if they're at that planning stage before they even apply for a grant?
What they might need to do to, like, what their DNR contract obligations might be, they can call us. We are on our webpage. And Joe and Renee are really great about looping us in on emails or just redirecting you to us. We are here to answer questions, and phone or email. Find us at a conference, things like that.
Yeah, and you can check wetland documentation anytime you want. It's online. You can also do, if you're interested in if there might be potential environmental resources, there is a conservation planning report, which is a free report before you get to the pay to do the full review. So that's something you could look at as you're planning your project as well, to take that into consideration at a time.
We have a question.
Thanks, Joe. Jenny, Sarah, this is Stuart with SRF. Can you give a little bit more information about campground plan approval? Is that something that we send to you and you facilitate that review and approval, or how does that happen?
Great question. Grantees will be facilitating that. As the DNR managers, anything that's on here, we're basically the collectors of information. So we want to see that the review has been completed. The other thing with like campground plans is once the campground is constructed, there's a licensing process that needs to happen. We need to have the documentation for that before we can do the final reimbursement. So we're really just the collectors of the work that has been completed so that we know that these steps have been done. We can maybe help you get pointed in the right direction of who to reach out to if you don't know where you should be submitting things. But the actual submission would be completed by grantees.
And I would just add to the main thing that we're reviewing for that on our end, besides collecting, is to make sure that there has enough accessible sites per camp unit type. So we have requirements of how many accessible sites you need for different camp, and it's by camping type, so like tent versus RV, that sort of thing. So we would just be checking to make sure we have those required numbers of sites as well for our policy.
I don't either. So,
Brad's good.
yeah, so you mentioned that, so would that be different, the accessible sites, is that different than what would be required by MDH for your licensing?
The MDH is mostly for like the shower and restroom facilities and things like that, and so it's a little bit different.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just making sure those numbers
Yep,
kind of match.
yep. We defer to them in terms of like number of shower and restroom facilities needed based on campsites, and we're looking at more of the accessible by unit type. So, does that help, Brian?
Yeah, and just making sure those numbers are available for people as they start to plan.
They are, and if you can't find them, email us.
Okay, another question here, Dave?
Yeah, more campground question. Is this for new campground constructions? We've got an old campground, we're building a new bathhouse. Do we still go through that now?
Yes, it is for both existing and new. Good
Nice.
question. Yep.
Any other questions, just raise your hand, but this might be a good time for you to talk about the reimbursement process. We know we talked about it a little bit later, but we got a couple minutes, so do you want to talk about,
What about it?
they want their money, how do they get their money?
Would you like to talk about how the grant match and the grant award is
Yes.
reimbursed, and then the final reimbursement?
Yes, and I will be going through this more later, so I'll do a quick overview, and then we can go through it again, and then we can ask questions then too. So, in your award letter, you'll have the total project costs, as well as the grant amount and the match amount. The match amount is a percentage of the total project costs. So each reimbursement, we will hold that percentage. So if you have a 10% match, and you come in for $100,000 of reimbursement, we will pay out $90,000 if that's all eligible costs. The reason we do that is, I know it doesn't happen very often anymore, but in case of an underspend, it prevents us from having to then go back and get money returned back to us, because the amount is prorated. So if you have a 10% match on $1 million project and it comes in at $900,000 instead of $1 million, we could only pay out 90% of that $900,000 because it's still requiring that 10% match on the total project costs. So that's that. So I'm going to pause that for now. So in terms of the final reimbursement, we do hold a 10% retention, and that is held until we can go out and do a final inspection visit of the site, which we do alongside with the commission. And if there's any outstanding items, like if we need handicap parking signs posted or an accessible walkway added, or if we still need the recorded deed restriction, once we're done the final and have all of those items done, then we can pay out the final 10%.
Awesome, thank you. Any additional questions? All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe.
We look forward to the panel discussion featuring you this afternoon after lunch, and yeah, you're ready for it, we know. Ready for it to be over.
Did not say that, Joe.
You were thinking it really hard.
Yes. So, thank you again. What some of you may be here preparing for is, okay, this meeting is specifically for the people who've already been granted awards, but if you're here because you want to apply for a grant in the future, we do have a little bit of information for you about this next application process. For our acquisition and development legacy grants, as well as our connecting people to the outdoors grants, that starts on April 1st, as it usually does. So that grant application opens up in our portal April 1st, and the deadline is July 31st at midnight. It's not a 5 o'clock thing. We allow you to stay up as late as you want, just so it's in by midnight. We will have some fresh materials for you to look at in the application toolbox as you go about completing your application. So be sure to download the newest resolution template for your county board or your city council to pass. Make sure it's the newest language, as well as the budget, and of course, all the new information that will be in our application guidance materials as well. There's a few tweaks that we'll highlight in there for you once we get that published, probably next month in February. So it'll actually be a little bit earlier than usual because we got ahead a little bit this year. We've got a couple of new grant opportunities that we want to make sure everyone is aware of. We know some of you are interested in this. We've given out a couple of grants in these areas, but we still have some dollars available for it. One is in our environmental and archaeological grant applications. This is in an ongoing cycle. Excuse me. This is really in preparation for future development projects. So if you're thinking, we've got a campground we want to redevelop, we've got a day-use area that we're going to need to apply for in a couple of years, come to us for an environmental and archaeological grant now so that you can complete a lot of the SHPO documentation that is required. One of the reasons we like to do this early is that occasionally you find things and adjustments have to be made, right, Drew? Drew's laughing.
Not too hard.
How true that is.
And so in that case, you know, it's nice to know that up front, so you can make adjustments, you can adjust budgets, you can adjust designs. So what you come to us for is what a real project might look like instead of scrambling to adjust budgets, maybe find some additional dollars later on. So we really encourage people, even if you're not quite sure what that project will be, if there's an area that you can scope out in your facility, that we can get your environmental work done early, apply for the grant. All the materials are in the grant application guidance, and you can learn more or just give us a call, and we'll fill you in on some of the details on that. The other one is our Access and Inclusion Grant, and that is largely for accessibility issues and or opportunities you may have in your park. Smaller ones. You know, our grant managers are going to be looking for, when you develop a park project, that all your trails are accessible, that were a part of that, or any buildings that are built have accessible walkways and doors, and all those pieces are a part of it. What if you've got some of those accessibility issues in your current facilities? Well, this grant is here to help you get through and figure out some of those issues. So they can help you smooth out some of those ramping issues, fix some doorways, you know, do all those sorts of things. A big thing that this can do that can be really helpful for accessibility is signage. Just making people know, making sure they know what is accessible within a park as soon as they step out of their vehicle or wheel out of their vehicle, whatever the case may be. So you can also find that information in our grant guidance, and just give us a call and talk through us what that project might look like. Neither of these projects, as of now, have a required match. So that can be, all those projects can be fully funded through the commission grant cycle.
Joe,
Yes?
what is the typical size of those types of grants?
The typical size? We are looking for, I think it's 50,000 tops on, we are looking at $50,000 tops on the environmental and archaeological. As far as what we can grant, you can add your own dollars on top of that. And what was it for the, did we go for 100 for the? 100,000 for the Access and Inclusion Grant. We've got about, every year we're looking to fund that with about $250,000 total. So when that gets used up, we may add more to it, we may not, just depending on. Renee?
Well, and for those grants, I would also remind you that there's no cycle for that. So if today you leave here and decide that you have a project that you need to do the environmental, archaeological on, or access, you can apply for that in the portal anytime. What we've done is saved funds out every year, so those dollars are available right now. So you don't have to wait until a year that goes by. So please do spend the funds. They're set aside for these issues because we know they pop up. And all of your facilities should be accessible, obviously. But if you're looking at a project in the future and you want to get that work done now, the funds are available now. So apply, go in, take a look, apply, and we can award those funds very rapidly.
How quick's the turnaround?
Turnaround would be probably 2 months at the most. We don't have a meeting in February, so for this time of year that would slow things up, but generally we'd be able to turn those grants around pretty rapidly.
Be in touch with us because we can help you figure out, we need them a little bit before our commission meetings as well, so we can get them on the agenda, give everyone time to review it, usually a couple of weeks. So be in touch with us as to when we need those in, just for our own cycle. All right, I'm gonna go back to Roger, and then I'll come back.
So a couple of questions. On the archaeology grant, does that future project, does that have to be spelled out in our master plan already? Or could it be something that's not in the master plan that we would like to do some archaeological work on now because our site is so rich?
Ideally, everything that we would be funding would be a part of your master plan, but as long as it's within the designated facility and it's something that you've got a future idea for, I think that would be completely eligible.
And then on the accessibility, the way that I'm interpreting that is that would be accessibility to an existing or proposed feature, not the feature itself, like an observation tower, for example. And so would the accessibility grant be more like resurfacing trails and accessibility to buildings and that kind of thing, but not necessarily a new feature within the park?
Correct. That's what we're shooting for, yes. All right. Yeah, we'll get up to Sarah here, and then we'll go to the other
I
Sarah.
got a mic. We're gonna do all the Sarahs.
It's such a popular name, you must be in your 40s. Just a quick story, I played basketball, 5 of us were Sarahs on the team, if that gives you any indication. No, my question was, you said that there was $250,000 total for the fiscal year. Is that combined for both grant, or is that each?
That's each.
Okay, thank you.
So when it comes to the signage, so when it comes to the signage and maps for the inclusion, and I haven't looked on the website, are there any resources that you guys are able to give us if we have no idea who to go forward if we do research on, if that makes sense?
Yes, yes. There are resources on the website, and also I'd say the first stop for you should be the U.S. Access Board website. It's rich with everything. It's detailed well by chapter, and you can find the information you need there, but there are information sources on our website.
Next one, Allison.
For the environmental and archaeological grant, is the elimination of the match going to be in this next round? Okay.
Yes, the elimination of the match starts with this right now. We wanted to encourage people to apply for those funds. We haven't seen the interest that we'd like to see, so we decided recently, the commissioners met and they talk about this in detail all of the time to make sure that this process is good for everybody, and that seemed to be a hindrance, so that went away.
Any other, where is some more hands up? All right.
Just wanted to add a clarity that for the accessibility and inclusion grants, that there's no ground disturbance in those. We could skip some of the checklist items that we talked about, but if there's any like new trails and things like that, then we need to go through that process.
All right. Very good. I think that might be a little check. All right, so we'll take a little break. When the lunch is ready, we'll make sure to let you know. And just take a little time and get to know some of your fellow colleagues. So thank you all very much. How's everyone doing? Awesome. awesome lunch. We really, I tell you, they knocked it out of the park today. Let's give a big round of applause to our catering staff. Thank you all, everybody. It's been a great time so far. Love seeing all the conversations everyone's having. Let's keep that up as we work through the day today. Feel free to ask lots of questions as we go through the panel. It's meant to be interactive. We've got our best experts here, so let's keep asking those questions. If you do have a question, raise your hand nice and high. Renee will come over and she will be the microphone stand for you for the afternoon.
Microphone stand?
Yes. So I would like for us to start off first with a quick round of introductions. Please just remind everybody who you are, who you're with, and what your role in the process is. So we're going to start off with you, Jenny. Everybody should turn your microphones on if you can, if you haven't already. And we'll just go through the front panel here.
Testing, we're good? Okay. I'm Jenny Bupke, and I am one of the grants coordinators with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources.
Sarah Winterberg, grant coordinator with DNR.
I'm Kelly Gregg Johnson, and I work in the State Historic Preservation Office. I'm an environmental review specialist, so a review manager.
Steve Cohn, I'm the planning manager for the city of Red Wing, and I served as the project manager for Himanicha Barn Bluff Regional Park Phase 1 and Phase 2 improvements.
Scott Brepke, Cannon Valley Trail. I am the trail manager.
Jimmy Marty, environmental scientist and consultant with Emmons and Albert Resources, helped out Scott on his project.
Carlin Ziegler, Olmsted County Parks and Trails Director and Commission Member.
Thank you all, and just to make sure the microphones work and that we can pick it up on our video, please be sure to speak closely in the microphone if you can today. So our first bullet point, the first item, remember we're talking this afternoon about the checklist, the pre-contract checklist that all of you see in your grant application guidelines and an instructions document. So the first item on that list, we're going to ask Jenny from the DNR staff to talk about this part of the process, what's involved with that. And this is one of our newer items, so I don't know if any of our other panelists will have much to talk about, but if you do, we'll let you jump in with that. So Jenny.
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a newer requirement, and I think last year's awards were the first that went through this process. But after you receive your grant award from the commission, Renee, on behalf of the DNR, will send you the required documents and submit to your grant manager. The required documents for every project are an organizational chart and a form asking about your experience administering grants, including from the DNR, and if any current principals have been convicted of a felony financial crime in the last 10 years. So it's kind of basically a quick checklist and certification document. Once we receive the documents from Renee, your DNR grants manager will review, as well as any other prior grant experience that you have with the DNR. If we need any additional financial documents, we'll request those as needed, and then we will make a determination of any risk mitigation measures, again, only if as needed. If any of those are identified, they'll be added to your contract, and we'll notify you when we send the draft contract for review about the clauses that have been added.
Awesome, thank you. Doesn't that sound like fun? Yeah, that's great.
Yay!
So first I want to ask our other panelists here, as a part of any projects that you have worked on, or maybe are into now, anybody want to add anything about your experience with that?
I've done it, and it's pretty easy. As long as you have an org chart, it really is not too difficult.
That's exactly what I think we wanted to hear. So any questions from the audience on this one before we get going?
Thanks, Joe. Just maybe a backup question. When will we get the award letter?
You did.
Okay. All right. I'll check the inbox. Isn't there some question of like the funding not being appropriated yet?
Well, yes, it's.
Oh,
Okay, so you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so So you've received the award letter from the commission. So now what you're working on is the pre-checklist documents? Pre-contract, yeah. While we await for the funding, which would be available effective July 1st. And that's after, that is when you get the contract. So there's the difference between the award letter and the contract.
You scared me.
No, I said that. We got it sorted.
Awesome. Any other questions? All right, very clarifying, thank you. The second item, we're going to actually turn it over to Shippo to talk about the Minnesota Historical Sites Act and Minnesota Field Archaeology Review. And we've got a little bit of information on our slides to kind of go along with that. So Kelly, feel free to talk a little bit about your process and introduce a little bit so everyone feels comfortable with what you're what your process is.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Kelly, and I'm going to talk a little bit about just high-level review for our office. So we review projects for potential impacts to significant archaeological sites and designated historic properties, so those properties that are listed in the National or State Registers of Historic Places. So when you get ready to submit your project for review, we need all the information, and actually there's a couple of handouts that you should have. The first one actually talks about kind of the process, and there's a bunch of links to the state statutes that apply, and then more information on our website about how to submit a project for review. And the second one here is actually a template cover letter to send to our office. And you should make sure to really know your project well. Make sure and include a very good project description, the location of the project, send in maps, describe any ground disturbance that may have happened in the project area. Sending project photos is really helpful too, so it kind of shows us, what the area looks like. Also, if you know that there's been an archaeological survey already done in your project area, please submit a copy of that report when you submit the project to our office for review. A new thing that we have this year too is that if you have a new survey that's been done, particularly for your project, it needs to be submitted to our office for review, but it also needs to be uploaded to the Office of the State Archaeologist portal. It's a new thing, and that's where we do our internal review for those reports. Once all this information is received in our office, the good project description, maps, photos, any site plans or construction plans if you have them, for your project, it gets logged into our database for review, and it gets routed to mostly our archaeologists for review, but also if there's design review, we have other subject matter experts. Our review process takes about 30 to 45 days depending on workload basically, and then we get back to you with comments on whether or not we think your project will impact significant archaeological sites or designated historic properties. If you have not had a survey done in that area and there's going to be a significant amount of ground disturbance, we may recommend that you have an archaeological survey done for this project so we know whether or not there are significant archaeological sites in your project area. And then we provide comments within 30 to 45 days, and then if there are significant archaeological sites in your project area, we would then work with you to design a project to try to help avoid adverse effects to those properties or minimize, or if we can't avoid adverse effects to these significant sites, then we will have to figure out some mitigation. So that's pretty quick, pretty high level. I don't know if you have specific questions regarding what you need to submit, what happens down the line if if something's if you do an archaeological survey and a site is discovered, then how you need to know whether or not the site's significant, try to avoid effects to that site, or minimize effects or work on mitigation. So If you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Renee. So if we're preliminarily looking at a site, do we still fill out this form, or do we just contact you guys about preliminary review of a potential project?
Yeah, I would say if you have a project in mind and you know where it's gonna be located, you know, the sooner you reach out to us, the better, because it does take time. So every time we receive something in our office, it's a 30 to 45 day review. So you send in the project and you're not sure if you need an archaeological site or not. You don't know the level of ground disturbance. I'd say in a lot of park areas, there's probably high potential for archaeological sites being in those areas. So, you know, we may recommend a survey. So that's the letter that goes out. You hire an archaeologist to do the survey report comes in, that's another 30 days. So the sooner I think you start this process, if you know what your project is, if you have the location for it, the sooner the better, I think, that consultation, because it does take some time.
How many archaeologists are available within the state of Minnesota, and is there a list that people can look up for that?
I don't know the answer about how many there are, but there is a list through the Minnesota Historical Society. There's a specialist directory that they have, and there's a link that we can provide you, and you can look for archaeologists and they'll come up with a list.
I know I worked with Sue up in Duluth.
Yeah.
Is in the northern Minnesota area, is there more than just that one?
Well, the archaeologists will travel
Okay.
you know, a lot of, they'll travel all over the state,
Right.
so, yeah.
Thank you.
There's also some out-of-state that work in Minnesota as well.
Any other questions? I guess just for a strictly acquisition grant award, is an archaeological survey not required?
No, but I will say that if you're strictly, you know, doing acquisition, we would usually say, you know, for the acquisition, we're not recommending a survey. However, if it's in a high potential area, we will, with the caveat of further development on that parcel, we would say we would recommend an archaeological survey before development.
But the acquisition would need to be submitted to you for
Yes.
that actual
Yeah.
documentation that you
Correct, yeah. And we've done that for the last couple of years, we've had some of that, yeah. Good question.
All right. I'd like to continue on with our panel to talk about this specific item. We're hoping our panelists can share some of their experience, some of their knowledge and insights, and hopefully make all of you feel a little bit more comfortable with the process through what they've experienced. So, Steve, I think we're going.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I'm gonna be around for the rest of the day, so if you have specific questions or want to talk about projects, please, you know, come up. It's kind of easier to talk specifics, so I'm happy to talk with any of you if you'd like.
Steve?
Yeah, on this specific topic, our project actually was phased out. So we had a phase one, and that involved creating a new kind of welcome plaza to the park, which didn't have one before. And it also involved going up on the bluff itself. If you're familiar with Barn Bluff, it's a huge bluff that kind of sits by itself. This one? Let's use that one. This one works better. It's a big bluff that kind of stands alone in the middle of the Mississippi River on the edge, right on the edge of our downtown. And one of the things we changed the name to is Himanicha Barn Bluff Regional Park. And the Himanicha is the Dakota name for Red Wing, the village site in Red Wing, which means hill, water, and wood. And so we did incorporate that into our park plans. And it's really important to remember that this site was here for thousands of years, and people have been there for thousands of years, and there were cultural resources on top of the bluff. So our phase one included moving some trails that existed for hundreds of years up on the bluff that were actually getting close to impacting known burial mounds in this case. We had 3 known ones on the bluff, and are already encroached on it. And so one of the things we would have done working with SHPO here is we created a plan to move some of these trails to eliminate the impacts we're having on those. And some of that included a plan where we had ground penetrating radar used on the bluff to find new routes that weren't going to impact cultural resources, known or unknown. And one of the issues we had is when we were going to put new trails in places, Prairie Island, which we work with, and I'll talk about later in a different bullet point today. We have a really good relationship with the Prairie Island community and their Tribal Historic Preservation Office, and they didn't want us to investigate anything we found underground. And so we basically had to go up there and chart off areas and find a path that had no anomalies underground that they were concerned about that we would be impacting. So that is, one example of what we did working with SHPO to mitigate or make sure that we're protecting cultural resources. And in this case, it was Native American cultural resources. But also on the bluff, as Euro-Americans came to Red Wing, Barn Bluff was used as a lime source. So they quarried limestone, they had lime kilns on the bluff to make lime for construction projects and things like that. And so there's these two different histories on here to work with. The Native American that was up to 2,000 years old in our area, and then the short-lived quarry industry on the bluff that was really about 40, 50 years. And our phase 2 was creating an ADA trail from our new plaza that we created in phase 1 a couple years earlier back to the GA Carlson lime kiln. And I think we'll probably have some photos up here for you to see, or there's one in the policy and planning report that kind of shows the structure, industrial structure that's been abandoned since 1909. And in this case, we had industrial archaeology we had to work with. So with SHPO, they wanted us to look closely and make sure we weren't impacting with our project any above ground or below ground resources. And so we actually had to end up creating a monitoring plan, and we had 106 Group, a firm in the Twin Cities, put that plan together for us, and they were on site during all of our excavations to make sure we weren't impacting or damaging any underground archaeology. We also worked with our friends out at TPO again, but they weren't as concerned about this area of the bluff just because it's been so altered over its history as an industrial use. And so one thing I also wanted to mention, and not everybody has this ability to do it, but in 2014 to 2015, we did a cultural landscape report for the entire bluff. The whole bluff is listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and the kiln itself is a separate listing in the National Register. And we really got a head start on all of our projects that we needed to do to restore the kiln. We got historical and cultural funds through the legacy through Minnesota Historical Society for that. And this document really set our path forward as we went through, and it was really great to have this done by professional archaeologists. And so we had a lot of this work done before we even applied for our grant here to actually construct those projects. So just a couple of examples we had.
Any questions? All right, then we'll move on to Scott. Scott and Jimmy, do you have anything you want to add in this area?
No.
Okay, Carla?
Sure. We've had a couple of projects that involve some archaeology. I think if you have any natural water source in or around your projects, you can pretty much assume you are going to have some archaeology in that area. So get somebody on board early on, find those archaeologists on the list, and start working with them. As you know, there's 3 different phases to archaeology. There's phase 1, which is basically paperwork and looking back through records. They look at the land maps and surveys and things like that, and just kind of look to see what the potential is. And that's your cheapest option or phase, depending on your area. I've seen between $5,000 and $10,000 for that, so that's a good budget for that kind of an area. If you are by water, a lot of times you're going to have a phase 2. That's where they start digging and really looking around. looking for artifacts. But I do want to say that just because they find something doesn't always mean it's going to be significant. So I think that's a big factor that just ask lots of questions. When you're with your archaeologist or you're working with Kelly, it's really about asking a lot of questions because there's a lot of nuances and there's a lot to learn. And so just because they find some flakes and things like that doesn't necessarily make it a significant site that you have to do a huge amount of mitigation for or do extensive digging and things like that. So always be asking questions. And you know, we maybe sometimes didn't ask enough questions, but we learned along the way. We had some points where we wanted to do some geothermal, and that was looking for hearths and things like that without digging. And we did that, and they found some spots, and then we found out that they didn't actually find some spots because we had done prairie burns there in the past. And the burns themselves kind of showed up on the radar. So it was our prairie burns that were showing up and not the hearths. And so the type of ground disturbance that you have in those areas also makes a difference. So really kind of think heavily about what has been done in the past on that land a long time ago and 10 to 15 years ago. So knowing your land and knowing what's been done is really important. Don't assume that because it's been disturbed that they're not going to be interested in it, because they will. Even if it's a plowed field, they may still find some archaeology or have some interest in that area. So, what we assumed was a plowed field is disturbed. Some of the archaeologists say 2 inches deep can still have some interesting things there. So don't make any big assumptions about the depth of disturbance or things like that. The area that we generally were looking at for archaeology was between 12 inches and 30 inches deep is kind of what their zone looks like for archaeology. So when you're planning, you want to kind of take that in mind if you're going to be digging or if you're going to be putting in water lines, electrical lines, all that kind of stuff. You gotta be thinking about the depth of all those things. Can you go under? If you can go under 30 inches or under 3 feet, you might be good. You can pour those lines and be okay. If you can't, you may have to completely move your water line. So we had that with our first project of our nature center where we found some archaeology right along where our sewer line was gonna go. So now our sewer line has a really fun little curve in it. It can't go straight. We had to curve around that area. And that worked fine. That was, I guess, an easier mitigation than some things. But other times you just can't avoid the area. And so mitigation, I think, becomes a dance of thinking outside the box sometimes about what you can and can't do. And that, again, comes working really closely with your archaeologist and Kelly on what all of your options are. Don't just say, we can't work in this area at all, because sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you can really do some different mitigation options that are going to allow you to still be able to build in that area. Some are more expensive than others, and some really are not that bad of an option. So in our campground building, we had a 50-site campground, and there were 8 sites that were within an archaeological zone. But the factors that were in there, the artifacts that were in there, were not considered like super significant enough to be on a registry. So then we were able to work with the archaeologists and the team on some mitigation about, okay, we just won't dig in those sites, we need to build up instead of digging down. We won't do water lines in those areas, no planting of new trees, which requires digging. So we just had to really be a little bit more creative in those areas in our mitigation. And just kind of really looking at what our options were to continue to be able to build the sites, because we knew we didn't want to just completely eliminate 8 of our 50 sites out of our campground. So we worked pretty heavily with mitigation. So again, it is just a lot of conversation, it's a lot of questions. If you feel very strongly about a component in your project, then you really need to just be talking through it with everybody and and sometimes you have to kind of push for your project and find the right solution that works for you instead of just giving up and saying, oh, there's archaeology there, we're not going to do anything about it. So be your own advocate a little bit and try to work through some of those solutions that you can find with everybody. So.
Can I have something? Yeah, we worked with you quite a bit, and you had a very good archaeologist that you hired. I just wanted to, you mentioned phase 1 and phase 2, phase 3. So I think just for clarification, there's a phase 1A, and that is where you hire an archaeologist to go out, take a look at your site, do background lit search, and then they give a recommendation on whether or not they think additional phase 1 archaeological survey is necessary. Phase 1 archaeology is basically doing testing, shovel tests to see the presence or absence of archaeological materials. And so the phase 1 is where they actually go out and do field work to see if there are actually archaeological sites there. Phase 2 is evaluation of the site. So not all sites are significant. So, you know, if the site is not significant, you can build your project, and we don't, you know, there's just no need to save those sites. But if the site is significant, that's where we get into, let's try to avoid impacts to those sites. Let's try to minimize impacts like you did. I think in your case too, I think part of the site had been compromised, right? There was like not very good integrity, and so I think that's part of it too. Like maybe not the entire site is important, but you did also fence off, I think, a big portion of the site that had more potential to have information. So I think that's just something for you to keep in mind. You can, you know, always hire an archaeologist to do this phase 1A lit search and assessment. But if they do recommend, you know, if there's archaeological sites in that area, if it's high potential, like you were saying, near water and there's other factors too, but water is a big one. And they're recommending in phase 1, I would recommend that you go ahead and do that. Because again, you send in the phase 1A and they're recommending a survey that's like a 30-day review, and you could have just gone ahead and had them do that survey. And so you're not adding this extra step with our office where, you know, you're waiting 30, 60, 90 days to do the review.
Yeah, and even though our area didn't register for the National Registry, there's still potential that other things could be found in there. So what we had to do is our archaeologists developed a plan of oversight through the project. And so they actually came in and they trained the contractors what to look for while they're digging. So that if anything was found while they were digging, we stop progress. The archaeologist comes in, looks at things. So there's that overall plan that was still in place just in case. So the permits were pulled and we were ready to pounce on anything that happened to be found if anything popped up while we were digging. So that was part of that agreement between the state and our archaeologists and our project, just as part of mitigation.
Yeah, I think they're called inadvertent discovery plans or unanticipated discovery.
Thank you very much. Are there questions on this bullet, archaeological? There's got to be something.
Joe, I have one thing to add.
Yes.
So this sounds very complicated, but once you ask SHPO for the review and then they come back with the review letter, it spells it out in there what you're required to do. And I'm kind of a checklist guy, so you know, if there's 4 items I need to work on, you just slowly go through those. And SHPO is always there to answer any of your questions. Like, I think someone mentioned, well, where do you find archaeologists? SHPO will be able to answer that for you. So A lot of this sounds complicated, but if you just take it step by step, complete the things that are being required, it is fairly simple, so.
Thank you, appreciate that, everybody, great contributions. Any questions? If not, if something does come to mind at any point, feel free to just raise your hand and we'll help bring those questions forward at that time since we're all here. Yes, Dave?
Is this possible? Can you do this without an archaeologist, or would you just say, get one?
Not all projects require it.
But if you're building, disturbing, digging.
You know, that would be my recommendation. We can't make you do that. But I think in the long run, when you're planning for these projects, it's good to know where, you know, especially if you have a park that's undeveloped and you're doing it in phases, or you have a master plan, that sort of thing. If you're just doing archaeological surveys for every single project, and you're just avoiding sites, you don't know if they're eligible or not, you know, it may be, if you can survey the entire parcel that you're proposing to develop, even if it's in phases, because then you know where the sites may be and you can plan for each phase, like, oh, we already know there's a significant site there. Either, you know, we can try to avoid it or minimize impacts, or you just know that it's significant and we have to, and there's no way to avoid impacts, then we go ahead and get, you know, to mitigation. But again, you know, it's good to know what's in your park, you know, and it doesn't always have to be a project by project kind of survey.
Again, I don't think we have the tools to access all the sites and access all the information about history and what might be on our sites. So, and the archaeologist can be your advocate along the way as well. So we don't know what we don't know. And if there's something potentially there, it's not us that's going to be able to go and dig it up and sift through it and figure out exactly what the artifacts are and things like that. So to me, it's a small cost to have them come out and do all the legwork and research and all that to figure out what you might have.
So, quick follow-up question. How many of your projects got delayed, changed, impacted by this? I would say probably all of them. Is there any talk at the GMRPTC level of maybe requiring this before or as a part of the grant application? So not surprised.
That is exactly the reason why we started the environmental and archaeological grant, so that you can do this work prior to coming in for an actual grant application, so you know what's there and all the documentation's been done. So you're planning around it already.
Yeah, I think knowing your park is a big part of it. Like I said, if you're in a park or a trail that has a natural water source, then I think you kind of maybe plan on it. Yeah, it is held up to our projects, and I wouldn't say completely held up, but just extended out a little further than we thought. But I've had other projects in parks that really didn't have much going on, and they did a quick little phase 1 survey and off we went, and there was no issues. But if you do have archaeology, I would plan, it might bump you out 6 months, maybe a year if you end up having to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So.
Great question, thank you, Dave. Any others? All right, we will keep rolling on to our next item, which is the DNR Natural Heritage Information System request. And that one, Jenny is going to jump in with that one again as well.
All right, not a whole lot to say on this one other than it's required for every project. The review letter is valid for 1 year, so timing of getting that in is a bit important. We'll need that to be within a year or less when you submit it to your DNR grants manager for review in order to be considered. If it's more than a year old, so if you've had a prior project in that same area and you're coming in for like a second phase or something, we will want to have that updated so it's current. We review that letter for any recommendations, and where applicable, we'll incorporate those into the special conditions section of your contract, which is under your attachment A with your budget and scope of work. And that's all I have.
Fantastic, thank you. So we'll move on down the panel. Hate to pick on you first, Steve, but you are the next person in line.
For this,
Just leave them on. For this one, I did have one example, and it was from our phase 1 project. After we did that form, we found out they wanted us to do an avoidance plan because we have an endangered plant species on our bluff. Barn Bluff, the west and the south face are native bluff prairies, very rare ecosystems left in Minnesota. And the bladder pod plant is on the bluff, and the DNR wanted us to do a survey and then create an avoidance plan. And again, we've done a lot of background work on this bluff. We have conservation management plans created by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for us, and we've been managing our ecosystem, trying to preserve this native prairie, and working again with Prairie Island because it's a very important resource for their community. And so we were aware of this endangered plant up there. We've actually walked the bluff multiple times with biologists from the DNR and could not locate it, even though it's been said to be found on the bluff. So what we had to do, and it just slowed us down a couple months to get the project going, we hired a firm to come in and resurvey, look for the plant, and then since we couldn't find it, we still created an avoidance plan because we know the type of rock structure where it's going to be on the bluff most likely, and we just demonstrated that our trails, which are mainly on top of the bluff, they're single track trails, and that a majority of them are going to be in the same location, and where our new spurs to avoid the cultural resources or to avoid areas that had severe erosion, that we would be nowhere near where it's most likely to have the bladder pod plant. So that's just an example that we have for working through this form. So.
Thank you. Yes, Steve and Jimmy.
So, again, this is a fairly simple process as far as being told what you need, what is required of you to complete this required section. So, when you apply, it does take the DNR a little bit to get back to you. So I would suggest that you do apply, send in this request fairly soon.
2 to 3 months, I think, is the general timeline for DNR getting back to you.
I think that's
Not these good people.
I think they've improved their staffing now too. They had a really low staffing rate last year, and so they're taking a little longer. Generally, I think they're aiming for 60 days. Sorry, Scott, I derailed you.
So, but when you get this letter back, again, it just lists the things you need to be concerned about, what action items you need to take care of. And I am the Cannon Valley Trail is kind of a small organization where I don't have a lot of support. And I have been able to make it through these processes fairly easy. So we currently have a project called Bridge and Asphalt Replacement Project. And it sounds fairly simple, but when I received the review letter back from NHIS, there was a lot of concerns. And since we're a small organization, not a lot of staffing help, I looked outside of our organization to see who could help me out. And that is when I connected with Jimmy. Jimmy works with Emmons and Oliver Resources. I think you just are based out of the cities, or you're based out, okay. But anyways, I think I'm gonna kind of hand it over to Jimmy and kind of let him tell you how he helped me. And that might be something you might need to do too, is hire an outside resource to help you.
Yeah, so to reiterate, this can be a really simple process when you submit for that initial review to DNR. You might get a letter back that says you're good to go, and that it can even give you an automated review. So I mentioned the 60-day window, but if your site's really clean from this perspective, it'll be like a day or two, and you just are done and don't have to think about it again, really. And that's awesome. And I would say a lot of projects end up going that way, or just needing some minimal integration of recommendations or requirements. Now you can get into these scenarios like the Cannon Valley Trail, where you are dealing with pages and pages of recommendations and requirements from DNR. And that's where it can get a little more complicated, and it can snowball because it might recommend or require a plant survey, and then you do the plant survey and you find a bunch of plants. Or you don't find a bunch of plants and you're done. They didn't find the plants, there's no suitable habitat, and your road ends there. But if they do find the plants, then you might need to start getting into avoidance plans, like Steve mentioned, or if you cannot avoid, you might get into things like mitigation, which is a little more complicated, and we'll talk about that. But I do want to back up and just reiterate a lot of the things that we talked about with SHPO also apply in this scenario. Starting early to account for review times, delays, hiring contractors, things like that. It can be a very long process if you do end up in that snowball. Knowing your site, super important. I brought up these slides for a reason, because this is that trail corridor Scott was talking about. I don't know how well you can see the pictures, but we have one section of the trail on the left, another section on the right, and just looking at this, you might be able to guess where you're more likely to find sensitive resources. You know, we have a very developed area in Red Wing, and we have large tracts of undeveloped natural lands over here, near a river, near a bluff, lots of different types of environments. You're going to be much more likely to run into natural heritage issues on a site like the left than the right. And indeed, when we did surveys for this project, this image on the left is where we found the majority of our natural heritage rare resources. So knowing your site and your project activities is really important. Carolyn mentioned asking lots of questions, again, super important, and thinking outside the box. So the story with the Cannon Valley Trail, when Scott brought me in, is we were required to do plant surveys as well as write a turtle avoidance plan. And the turtle avoidance plan wasn't too difficult. DNR is really helpful, has a lot of good resources to help fit your project to best management practices that will suffice for that avoidance plan, and then be approved by DNR. So that was relatively straightforward. But we did the plant surveys, and lo and behold, I think in that area on the left, we found thousands of state threatened plant species that had not been seen there before, growing right up next to the trail. And Scott's project was aiming to just bring the trail width from 8 to 10 feet. And by doing that, we were potentially impacting thousands of this rare plant. So we had to problem solve with DNR, you know, can we avoid this? Well, no, not really. The trail is where it is, and we need to expand it to meet the project purpose. So unavoidably, we might impact some of these plants. So in those scenarios, you go to a mitigation step. And that's where you actually need to show a net benefit to that plant species as a result of your project and get a permit to take or harm that species from DNR. And there really isn't a set template for mitigation. This is where you can really start thinking outside of the box, working with your consultant, working with DNR on how to provide that mitigation. You know, some development groups with a lot of resources just pay a bunch of money or buy a big parcel of land But that, I mean, you're talking 6 figures a lot of times for that type of thing. So how can you be more creative to show a net benefit for this species in other ways? The solution we came up to with DNR and the trail was to do some additional rare plant surveys along the areas extending away from the trail to kind of see, you know, is this population a lot bigger than our survey found when it was just surveying the trail corridor? Is the way we're managing the trail actually helping this plant? And answer some questions about that species biology that we could then contribute to the knowledge of that plant. So that was one thing we did, but that wasn't necessarily enough. So another thing we did was work with the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, who is a great resource if you're getting into rare plant issues. They run a seed bank program and a rare plant propagation program through the University of Minnesota. And so one of our mitigation activities was hiring them for a fairly small fee to go out and collect seeds of the species before the project started, put those in their seed bank, so then DNR or the trail or whoever could use those seeds in the future for restoration projects. They also actually collected some of the live plants that were going to be impacted, and they're growing them in their greenhouse right now so that they can then go back out once the project's complete and put them in suitable habitat a little bit farther away from the trail. So that was one of our other mitigation activities, along with doing some things like educational signage, adopting a little more conservation-minded mowing protocol along that stretch of trail, and updating the trails management plan program. And taking all that together, DNR evaluated that and accepted it and granted a take permit. But that whole process to work out took a very long time. I think from the start, from when Scott contacted me with his long letter, to getting that take permit was about 1.5 years, because you have reviews done by DNR. In between, you have the plant surveys that need to get done, which plants only grow, you know, during spring, summer, and fall, so you're limited by time of year there. And some of these plants, they might only bloom and be able to be identified during 1 month. So if you miss that window, then DNR might say, oh, you're gonna have to wait till next year now. So it's really just, again, going back to that early start on this, and if you have issues in that letter that are identified, addressing them as soon as you can, so that you don't run into a year-long delay because you missed the flowering time for some plant. Yeah, that's our story. Any questions?
I'm gonna add just a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
If you're anything like my county, you would go with lowest bid on your construction projects. Which contractors don't always care about this kind of stuff, right? So when it comes to your project management, you're gonna have to be pretty diligent to make sure that your contractors are following all of this too. It's pretty easy to cut and paste this stuff from the recommendations into their contract, but when it comes to actually making sure they do it, I mean, there's a lot of erosion control things, there's a lot of special netting that you have to use for snakes and turtles and things, and so there's things that you're gonna have to make, as a project manager, make sure that they're actually following.
That's actually a really good point that I didn't touch on, and that goes to our turtle avoidance plan too. You know, we might come up with a special silt fence design, and then that's Scott and I working directly with the engineer then to make sure that gets on a construction plan set. And same goes for some of the rare plant stuff. Like maybe we weren't paving over this area of rare plant, but we want to make sure the buffer was around those, and that was in the construction plan set. So making sure you're coordinating with the engineer and the contractor as well to get these specifications and designs in there, because DNR probably will eventually review those, and you don't want them, if you wait till the last minute on that, don't want them to say, well, this needs to be in the specs, and you have to go back and do more revisions.
Thank you so much. Yes, questions. Let me get over there quick, Mitch.
Thank you.
So, does the NHIS do any kind of considerations regarding like prevention of invasive species? With our project, there's a big concern among some of the public about what are we gonna do to prevent that? Is that part of the review process at all?
They, in almost every letter, they will provide some like boilerplate recommendation language for how to prevent invasive species. And sometimes that can be a requirement to put in contractor documentation, like you need to make sure equipment is washed if it's coming in from a different site, or you need to only use seed from this source to make sure it's not contaminated.
Other hands? Yep, go ahead, Jenny.
I was just gonna add on to Jimmy's point about starting early and the timing, because a lot of the kind of more basic recommendations are seasonal, like when to not cut trees to avoid bat habitat and things like that. So I just wanted to echo that a lot of the recommendation that we see kind of regularly are seasonal, so getting that information earlier is helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I focused on the surveys affecting timing, but like the avoidance measures you do can also play into your construction timing. So you can't do tree removals in a lot of areas in the summer, so you need to plan to be able to do those in the winter. Or if you are trying to avoid a plant, you might be able to work in that area if the ground is frozen and you're just running equipment over it. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? Joe and, Allison, yeah.
I know this is maybe a forecasting question that you can't answer, but I've been really thinking about timing because now I'm having to go through the NHIS review again for a project. And is there any talk about maybe extending that to like a year and a half or something because of just the seasonality aspect? Like, really, I don't want to put this to NHIS review until March or April because then it'll be good for next year's construction, but then a 30-day window, and anyway, a year and 6 months would be great.
We are not the ones that make that decision. Sorry, Allison.
If anybody asks.
Okay.
I will add one thing onto that, is if you do an avoidance plan or something as part of your NHS, I believe those have a longer approval
Yes.
time. Is it 5 years?
5 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, yes. I know this is we built a regional trail through a state park a few years ago. And not only did we do the rare plant surveys and archaeological work, we also had to do a tree inventory survey to avoid some of the butternuts and different things for mitigation. I know you guys don't really do this, but is that something that is going to be required in the future?
If a butternut squash tree survey is recommended in the NHIS letter, we do require that, yes.
And that often gets folded into a plant survey if you already have a rare plant, like if you have a prairie plant or something. Most rare plant contractors can do the surveys at the same time then.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Is it expensive?
Questions, is it expensive?
The review, or which part?
What part of it does the DNR do for free?
Again. So, it takes a second.
Yeah. So actually, to kick off the NHIS, the review, you can submit the project into Minnesota Conservation Explorer, and that's just a quick and easy. It would be like, I would compare it to the initial data request that you would put in for SHPO. This is sort of the environmental version of that. If a review is then required, which I think they are all required, but so that's when the fee comes in, and I honestly don't know how much.
I think it's $90.
90 for the review. So I would say that, to me,
That's cheap.
yeah, I was gonna say that would be the cheapest part of your process if there is mitigation or findings.
But yeah, I anticipated this question, so I was looking at the numbers last night. Because it will really depend on how much that NHIS letter, the recommendations that come from that, and then it can kind of snowball and tasks get added. You know, if you need the rare plant survey, you might have to do that, but if they don't find anything, you're done and your costs are over. If you have to work towards mitigation or avoidance plan, there's another additional cost. So, let me see, did I write it down? Yes. So in total, to get through the whole mitigation process with Scott on his project was about $35,000. And about half of that was just rare plant surveys, and the other half was consultant time. But if you parcel that out into each step of the process, it was probably a series of $5,000 tasks that each one of those had potential to end the process. We just happened to have to carry it through the maximum extent.
Our project went to an area that was culturally sensitive, and there was a person on site for 6 weeks watching every scoop of material that was moved. And I didn't ask because the county was, or the contractor were paying for it, but I would imagine that was fairly expensive.
Was it for plants or for cultural resources?
Previous village site.
If that was tribal monitoring, I think that goes anywhere from about $1,000 to $1,500 a day.
I was just gonna add to the cost that I just said to it. It really is gonna depend on your project and activities as well, and that does not include the numbers I gave does not include anything that has to be integrated into the design and construction costs. That might be an additional avoidance measure, things like that. So in the end, it's gonna vary a lot. But, you know, those are some ballpark numbers for Scott's project.
I would just like to add that our selection of projects and speakers here today were selected because they have a lot to talk about, because they had really good examples of what this process might look like. Not every project that we go through, as many of you here have already experienced, go through all of this or even much of it. So don't expect that this is the norm, but expect that this might be something that you have to know about. So that's really our purpose today, is to share with you and get you a little more comfortable with the what ifs. We understand that this can be scary sometimes, and a lot, but you also have good resources right in this room that are showing that it can be done. It is completely doable by organizations that are similar to yours, and at the end of the day, they've got great projects coming out of it. So
Yeah, so that I'm not scaring you, I will say I do dozens of these types of reviews every year, and most of them end a lot sooner than Scott's. Scott's is one of like 2 mitigation permits we've had to do for any type of project in the last 5 years. So a lot of these are just submit the report to the DNR, or submit for the letter from DNR, and you're done. So just expectations for what you could potentially go through. Scott's just a lucky guy.
And I just want to say, if I can get through it, anybody can. Just
awesome, thank you. Any last questions? Or any more questions? Okay. We will move on to our next part of the discussion, which is going to be Sarah talking a little bit about water and wetland.
Yeah, this is another, this would be a checklist that Scott likes. It's quick and easy. So again, we'll collect the documentation, but you will go into the MPAR system, which is Minnesota DNR permitting and reporting system. But MPARS, just Google it, you'll get there. It'll take you, your first landing on that page is called, do I need a permit? And you go through a series of questions. If you need a permit, it's going to take you to the next page, which is a joint application between DNR, Board of Soil and Water, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's a joint application for any of the permits that you need. And so any of that documentation, if you don't need a permit, we need to see that. If you do need a permit, we need to see that you need it, and then we need to see your permits. And that is the completion of that. So.
Yes. I've limited more.
So just to clarify, so if you don't need a permit, are you looking for like a letter from local unit of government that says we've determined that we don't need a permit based on that initial assessment? Or do I have to submit something to MPARS and have them respond and say, why are you contacting me?
So there should be an output from that page that says you don't need it.
Okay.
No further steps. That's all we need.
Okay.
You can write a letter if you'd like, but you don't have to.
Maybe I missed this, but are all of these required before you apply for your project?
No, I would say applying for the grant award.
Right.
No, it's required before receiving a contract, after award. So award from the commission, grant contract from DNR. In between there, we would work with you on how to get a contract.
So as soon as you get the letter from us saying you're awarded the grant, start working on these things.
What about the archaeological stuff? Would you want to do that before the application? Oh, you would, okay.
Yeah, it would be good,
yeah.
that's why we have those archaeological and environmental grants available, because if you have a project you're planning on in the future, do it now. Because then as everyone up there has talked about, you know what you're dealing with, you know where you might have to mitigate, you know where you have to avoid. So do that now, and we have those grant dollars available to do it with.
I hesitate to answer that way, but I know but that's because we manage other grant programs where it's competitive and it's highly competitive grant programs that involve smaller units of government, and some folks just don't have the money to start it unless they know an award is coming. But you have this grant opportunity, so that's what's different between this and the other grant programs that we manage.
To clarify, you don't have to do archaeology early. You can do it now, but it's just suggested and preferred that you do it earlier on to get a better budget. So for that process, is it very extensive planning project, or can it be pretty like, this is our idea, and then get the archaeology? For the archaeology, do you have to have like a really specific plan and go through like all of those steps, or can you just do it like as pre-plan? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So if you were planning to build a new building like Carla did, a new nature center, if you got the funding for that, you'd have to go through those steps. So it just has to be, we plan to develop this area, so we'd like to have the funds to know this in advance. This is an unusual grant, I would say, and I think everyone would agree that there aren't a lot of these dollars available, and we want to help our applicants succeed. And we know that not everybody has those dollars available.
If you've got a 50-acre area that you're looking at a project in, it's helpful to kind of have a general idea of where your building is going to be on that 1 acre out of those 50 acres, so they're not having to survey as much. It's a good idea to just have a general idea of where you're digging and building.
Kelly, can you talk about Minship and OSA portal too?
Yeah, sure. So the State Historic Preservation Office has an online application. It's called Minship, and you can go on and you can search by township, range, and section, or by address, and what comes up as historic structures, so above ground historic structures. And there are also layers for archaeological districts on there. It's just very general for archaeology, because archaeology is protected information and non-archaeologists don't have access to that information. So for Minship, it's above ground historic properties, or bridges, districts, buildings. And so you can go in and look at your project location and see if anything is in your project area for above ground historic resources for Minship. Now, the Office of the State Archaeologist also has an online application. Their public map, though, is very limited because archaeological site location data is protected information. So you can go in and look at the layers, and basically what you're going to see is probably the whole section. And it will say in that section how many sites are located within that section, but you will not get specific locations for those sites. You'll just know somewhere in this section are 3 archaeological sites or 1. Something else to keep in mind, and there are areas in the state where there are existing cemeteries and burial mounds, and so that's something else to keep in mind if you know that, like your trail goes through burial mounds and sensitive areas. Our office does not review projects for possible impacts to cemeteries or burial mounds. That's the Office of the State Archaeologist and the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. And those layers are also in the OSA portal. And so, again, the specific information and locations of those types of resources you will not know, but you'd know that they are within that section, and that's something to be thinking about as you plan your project.
I think this is more for you, Renee and Joe. So does a project have to be eligible underneath Greater Minnesota to be considered for the? Okay.
So, to clarify, you would have to be a designated facility. So you would have to have gone through the process, be a designated park trail special feature in our system to qualify for that grant.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, going back to your question on both of the websites that she was mentioning, they ask you to define an AOI or an area of interest, and that can be, depending on your project, if it's a trail corridor, you kind of have an idea where that's going to go. So you don't have to be super specific, but again, it depends on the project, but it can be pretty general. So.
Yes, I believe I have the answer, but obviously our trail project has wetland impact, so we have to have a secured permit from different agencies. Do we have to also have the credits purchase in order to get the contract with the DNR?
Okay, no, they do not need to be purchased to get to contract.
But we do have to have the impacts approved though.
Yes.
You do have to have the impacts approved prior to meeting that checklist?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
So this is primarily, water and wetlands, primarily a state process, right? Don't forget to check with your local shoreland ordinance, planning and zoning office for setbacks to water sources, especially if there could be FEMA flood area involved.
I will just add regarding the wetland impacts needing to be approved prior. In my mind, that's a potential thing to factor into your timeline, because a lot of times you need a fairly advanced design in order to get those impacts defined and then approved. So, yeah, factors in the timeline for sure.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, you're probably 50-60% plan sets to really be able to hammer those down. So
yep.
You're well on the road on your plans before you even have your contract.
Anyone else? I forget where we were at.
That was water, not to be confused with those water and wetland permits.
Yes, I know that, but where we're at.
No.
Everybody get started.
Oh, on our panel.
I think Scott and I are signed up for this one too. And I don't know, I think it just is reiterating some things we've already gone through, but, you know, if you contact the right people and follow the steps laid out in front of you, it can be a fairly straightforward process, but, you know, again, it just goes into planning early, coordinating those timelines, integrating with design so that you can quantify impacts, things like that, and planning ahead for the review period on, for waters permits can be, it's usually about 60 days. So again, you're gonna have all these lags in review time. And if you need to get something like a wetland delineation done, that can only be done in the spring, summer, and fall. So like some of these other processes, it's just balancing these different timelines of when work needs to get done.
One question that I've had come up to me in the interim is, okay, if we know we're going to eventually get a project that will probably have impacts, who at the DNR or SWCD or Bowser should we be talking to about that, just to kind of get a jump on the process? Is there any way to start that or identify who to really find out if this is going to be something of concern?
Yeah, so a lot of these agencies offer pre-application meetings, and they're usually eager to do that so that they can get ahead of the ball and get you the information you need to know right away. Different points of contact for different types of waters. For DNR public waters, your area hydrologist is the person to talk to about your project. If you just Google DNR area hydrologist, there'll be a map that comes up and have phone numbers and emails. For wetlands, that is going to be through local government units, through Bowser's Wetland Conservation Act, and there's an LGU, local government unit directory. So if you Google Bowser local government unit directory, you'll get that spreadsheet, and that can really vary depending on where you're at. A lot of times it'll be a county, SWCD, watershed district, municipality. But yeah, that's how you find those people, and they're usually very happy to talk to you about your project.
This is a grant question. Do these work the same, that all of this work we'd have to do up front is not eligible for reimbursement or match?
Correct.
Great question. Any other questions? Yes.
So a quick question kind of in reference to, you know, having to go a bit into the design, which is a, you know, it's an eligible cost, like as an architect. Is sometimes though the authority given to go ahead with those design expenses through some of that, even though like we don't have the full contract back to actually start the work, so we're not losing out on that expense?
How do you know that's eligible, Lisa?
I just wanted to make sure I'm still thinking of that right.
So yes, in some cases, if there is a lot of design and engineering costs that needs to be done in order to get some of the stuff, we can issue a contract with special award conditions that no ground disturbance can be done until all of these items are completed. So that would go into the contract. We would make a note of that, and then we would email you once that special award condition is lifted and ground disturbance can begin. Great question.
Connor's sitting down.
So how long are the approvals good for, like if we're piggybacking some projects like one after another? So like we just accomplished phase 1 and now we got grant funding for phase 2, like, so like our wetlands approvals, like, are those good, like, since they're like right adjacent to each other as far as the projects?
So Jenny is saying wetlands is good for 5 years. The natural heritage review is a 1 year, you know, that would have to be updated. The permits are good for 5 years, so as long as you're within that 5 years, we would just need the documentation again. Yeah, so piggybacking projects, we can move a lot faster towards contract. Assuming there's, you know, much of the area has been reviewed already, even if your specific project hasn't, but the area that includes the project. So things can sort of roll a little faster with each phase.
And just to add on that real quick, so if your NHS letter is a year out, when you can go back to them and give them that number, that project number, and just ask them to do a re-review to get it updated, instead of going through the process again.
Okay, would that include the SHPO review as well?
I was just talking about this with Kelly. So if it is, sorry, not go, is that okay? That better? Better?
Yes.
Hear me now? Nope. Okay, just gonna roll with it. If there is no new ground disturbance and the footprint has not changed, we could use the SHPO review letter from the prior project. But if there's new ground disturbance in the new phase, we would have to go through SHPO for that new ground disturbance area, because it's a new area of potential effect. Did I say that right, Kelly?
Yeah, that sounds good. In the case that we were talking about, the review was done, the foundations were poured, right? And the column.
Will be.
Yeah, will be poured. And so this next phase would be construction of the building on top of the, what's that?
It's Wilmer.
Yeah. So yeah, in that case, I mean, that, you know, there's no new ground disturbance, so no potential to affect cultural resources. But again, if your scope of work changes at all and you don't have an archaeological survey that covers that area, and there's new ground disturbance, then, you know, we would be looking at that, so.
Yeah, I would say the same applies for wetlands and waters too. If it's a new scope or different activity or different location, you probably need to go through the process again.
So that'd be a good case if you know it's gonna get phased, and SHPO has recommended a phase 1 survey. Might just wanna go ahead and consider doing it for all future phases, so you kind of have it done at once instead of going piecemeal.
We have a campground that's gonna be extended, because RV use was up higher than permitted camping, so would we have to go through the same process of doing the SHPO? If that area has already been surveyed, if we're just extending it? Making it bigger?
Was the area of extension part of the original SHPO review?
I'm not sure if that.
Okay, yeah, so that we would just want to check that to see if it was part of the original surveyed area or not. Yeah.
Just to add to that too, is that if it's a separate project, if it's another grant, it's a separate project, we may, you know, you can submit it for review, but if you have a copy of that archaeological survey report and it's already been covered, then our response is going to be, you know, yeah, if it was negative, you know, no significant archaeological sites will be affected by the project. So it's really dependent on what the project is, the scope of the project, and where that survey's been done and what was found there.
Can I go? Hi.
Yes.
I know the answer to this, but maybe other people don't. But we're reclaiming a trail. We got a grant project to reclaim. Now it's going to be on existing surface. And there's not going to be any tree disturbance or anything like that, or wetland. I'm still going to have to go through the entire checklist, correct? I figured that. But for everybody else in the room, even though you're just taking a trail, existing trail, and refinishing it, you're going to have to go through this entire process.
Great question, thank you, Joe. Any other questions? Lisa?
This might be a dumb question. I mean, we're municipally owned. If we do projects on our own, is all this stuff required? I mean, just.
Outside of the grant process, you mean?
Yeah, like if we build a structure, let's say the city comes up with money and we wanna build and we're not using the grant dollars or applying, is this stuff required?
Yes, for SHPO it is, right?
Yeah. Field archaeology.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were doing your own work, I think, yeah, the SHPO for sure. I mean, environmental reviews would be recommended.
Yeah, I mean, the wetlands, waters, natural heritage, all that stuff is based in state statute for protections. That's probably why it's a required part of the grant process. As somebody doing a project, you're always able to interpret that statute and evaluate your site as you see fit and based on how you assess risk, right? You might look at it and say, I don't think there's any wetlands here, let's go ahead with the project. That doesn't mean a member of the public can drive by and say, I think they're impacting a wetland, and call somebody and investigate it. And so yes, this is all based in state statute. And doing it this way is like the safest, best way to make sure you're complying with state statute, I would say, for any project. But you have flexibility based on your own judgment as well in complying with state statute.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, I guess I am confused. I thought that if there weren't state or federal dollars involved, we didn't have to do some, not the wetland stuff, that always, and the environmental stuff always has to be done, but I thought it was the state and federal dollars that kind of triggered, like SHPO and things like that.
So, under the Minnesota Field Archaeology Act, it's for work on non-federal public land.
And to add to that, if federal or state dollars come into it to fund it, would sort of dictate how SHPO reviews the project. So it would be under different statute chapters that they would be reviewing for different things based on the funding source, but it's still coming back to the act.
Funding or permitting too, so sometimes if there's a core permit, that's also something that we would be reviewing, but that would need to come through the federal agency. And so with federal projects are very different, so we're just talking about state and local right now, but Field Archaeology Act does cover non-federal public lands, so city-owned lands, county-owned lands, that sort of thing.
Just a follow-up then. So I work for the municipality. If we're replacing a playground, let's say, are we supposed to go through SHPO on that?
It's based on whether or not there's a potential for significant archaeological sites there. So we aren't the preservation police and all of that. So you as the city, as a political subdivision that this covers, you need to assess the risk. Is it just replacing playground equipment in an existing playground? That's a risk that you can take. I'm not, but to have somebody look at the state statute and let you know.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out if
I get
there are
it.
other
I get
steps
it.
on other projects that I need to
Yeah, no, I get it.
So, okay, thanks.
Great questions. Anytime you have a question, give us a warning and raise your hand and we'll get over there as soon as we can, so thank you. Any further comments on water and wetland permits from our panelists? Carlin, Steve? No, okay. So with that, we'll move on to the next one. Item number 5, which is the environmental assessment statement. And I think Jenny, you're going to get us up to speed on this one.
Yep. So like everything else, this is required for every project. I don't have a lot to comment on this one other than it is a checklist. You go through all the items, you answer with all the information you have about the project, and you tell us if there's going to be potential impacts and what some of the mitigation measures are, if there are any. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to complete this kind of after you've done all of the other steps, because there are questions about impacts to water, endangered species, plants, cultural resources, things like that. So it is best to go through some of the other steps and kind of see this as like your finish item once you've done kind of all the other steps in the process. So it's kind of basically your summary sheet to all of the other work and research that you're doing about your project.
Okay, Dave.
You
mentioned all projects, but I see just trail projects on the slide.
That, we actually apparently missed that item on the slide, so, yeah, that is the next topic, unfortunately.
Ignore the slide behind me right now. This is the environmental assessment statement. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Not, I know, there's a lot of E acronyms, I know.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. Yep. And you didn't even know that that was going on behind you, so.
I did not, nope.
No. So regarding the EAS, from our panelists, Steve, do you have anything that you would want to share? Okay. Scott?
It's fairly simple.
Use your microphone. Okay.
It's simple, he said.
Carlin? Nothing more to add. Okay, now we can get on to the EQB. Thank you very much, which is going to go back to Sarah.
Yes, so EQB is another checklist item that, and the checklist itself actually has the links to the statutes that you need to be referencing. So you'll go to the first, let me look, it's Minnesota Rules 4410.4300. So you're going to go ahead and review that list, and then jump to point 4600 to look at the list of exemptions. And I think every project that I've managed so far, it has been exempt, so then I simply need a letter from the grantee or from the government unit stating that they are exempt and here is why. And then we need to have that on file. And if you need a sample of an EQB letter, just send me an email. I have a good sample on file.
Thank you. Any questions?
So it's just trail projects?
That this is now correct and applicable. Yes, we are talking, we are on to EQB.
I have one comment, Joe, and that's 25 miles is the key. So if you go over 25 miles, it applies. Under 25 miles, probably not.
Any other questions? Any comments from our panelists? Nothing to share? Awesome. Scott's like, I didn't go over 25 miles. Awesome. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands come up. So the next one we will go into is regarding consultation with tribal historic preservation offices. And this isn't so much a requirement from the state as something that our commission has said we want to strongly encourage. We don't have a way, because it's not in the contract, to mandate it. But we've seen so much success by requiring or encouraging applicants to work early and often with tribal historic preservation offices. And we know that this is something that is not always feasible. You may not always get a quick response or any response, depending on what they see and their staffing issues. But outreach to tribal historic preservation offices has produced tremendous results for some of our programs in our projects, not just because you're just doing outreach, but because of what you learn and the relationships that are developed. We've seen it dramatically improve and change what goes into your master plan and what those outcomes are, from the standpoint of making a site more accessible and more respectful and more welcoming to all. So think about taking that step, and we'll go through a project here that kind of highlights that, thanks to Steve, and talk a little bit about how that process might work and how you incorporated that. So Steve, do you want to chat a little bit?
Yeah.
I don't want to bite it, but our project is really unique, and Red Wing's really unique in general sense. The Prairie Island community is fully engulfed by City of Red Wing corporate boundaries. So the tribal community's trust land or reservation is fully surrounded by City of Red Wing property. And we have a long history, obviously. This is, our name comes from the Prairie Island community living in the site of our downtown community. And actually our relationship is really starting to blossom, the two government bodies and just the communities in general, since the development of our master plan for Himanicha Barn Bluff. And our phase 1 project, we involved Prairie Island from the beginning, not only about the cultural resources on the bluff, but also in the design of everything we put into the park. And so they were our partners side by side the whole time through the project. Our Welcome Plaza has Native American and Euro-American stories about the significance of the site. The design elements we used were Native American artwork and things like that. We even have statues, or we call them the storytellers, that on one side has the Euro-American story of the bluff and a relevant Dakota story on the backside, and you can push a button and listen to that spoken in Dakota. And so it was really a building block for our two communities. And if anybody's really familiar with pre-contact Native American history, Red Wing is covered in thousands of mounds. We're one of the highest density mounds in the upper Midwest, and so just about anywhere you want to do a project in Red Wing, you have a high risk of finding cultural resources. And so our two communities actually have a memorandum of understanding where every year we send our capital improvements plan to Prairie Island TPO, and we get together and we go through each one of these projects that have a potential for ground penetrating disturbance, and we go through each project and decide if there has to be further review and what that would look like, or if there's going to be on-site observation, things like that. So we're unique that we have this relationship, and I know not all of you would have that same relationship. I mean, I golf with some of these guys. I know these people on a personal level, and so it makes it a little easier for us. But as Joe mentioned, they're very short-staffed, and TPOs are a relatively new thing with the tribal communities. And Prairie Island, for example, doesn't just work in the Red Wing area. They work all over the state of Minnesota and the upper Midwest. And they might be out in the field for 6 weeks before they're even going to return your email. And so it is very important to try to reach out to them very early if you want to do that, because even with our relationship, we find that the communication back and forth is challenging at times just because of their work level and how small of departments they normally have. But again, this project and the funding, the grant we got, has really helped us build that community, which wasn't always the strongest relationship. So we're really fortunate to have been part of this project.
That is great, thank you. And we do have a picture of what that project turned out like. There's lots of documentation out there you can find across social media and on the city's website of what that project looked like. So if you haven't had a chance to go there yourself, I would highly recommend it. It's a great project, so thank you, Steve. Any questions before we move on to the rest of the panelists? Scott, do you have anything you want to add in this area? Okay, Carlin? No, great, tough to top that one, so thank you, Steve. All right, the next item on the list is the item number 7, which is the land approval certification form, and I think this is Sarah's.
Yes. So any lands for, and this is trails only, any public lands that the trail is crossing needs to have a certification by the public land owner, administrator, that it's okay to be using their land to cross with the trail. Any non-public land would need to be secured with a long-term lease or easement, but we have the form for the certification sign-off if you need it. So when you get your introduction
materials with the manual and the additional forms. If you are a trail project, you'll receive this certification form that you would need to have signed by all administrators of all public lands that you're crossing, including your own.
We have a question back here?
Yeah, I guess sorry for that one. Usually when we get these, we just, usually the county administrator or a city administrator does it. Do these necessarily need to go and get board approval from that organization?
No, that's not required by me. I would hope the board would approve before somebody signs off on it, but that, we don't need that, no.
Yeah, so we have an existing trail that was funded with federal dollars, looking to expand, and part of that expansion, the master plan includes going through DNR State Park. We recognize that there is a separate funding mechanism that DNR would have to follow in order to complete their segment of that trail, and then we would pick it up on the other side of the state park and continue our expansion. So would DNR have to sign off even if they do not have any intention of further developing their portion of the trail through their land?
No. No. I think the trail stops at the state park and then starts again at the state park. So that would be, so you're technically not doing work within the state park, is that what you're saying?
Well,
Correct.
yes and no. It's the trail stops within the state park,
Okay.
but if they choose to not continue that length, but we pick it up from outside of the state park. I think that's the question.
Yeah, these funds wouldn't be for the portion of the trail that's within that.
Right, they
So
would have to go through their own process.
they would have to go through their own process, yes.
What if it's wildlife management area
Same,
and the trail does go through?
if it goes through it but you aren't completing the work within there, and it's an existing trail or a new trail?
Next phase.
New.
Is the grant money being used to construct the trail in the WMA?
Not at this point.
No.
Okay.
Then no.
Same answer.
Then no. Basically, I think, so whether it's state land or not, if you have a trail system that runs 20 miles, 40 miles through, across many different ownerships, we're only looking for certification of the segment that's being funded by this project. So not the entire trail segment, the segment that's being funded, whether it's state land or other. So that's my final answer on that one.
All right. Scott?
I really don't have too much to say about this, except, if you're a trail project, this is something that you do need to do. And this by far is the easiest, at least for me it is. I send this form to the county, the administrator signs it. I do fill them in on the project. I think if I had been with the trail just a minimal amount of years, he'd probably want to sit down and chat about it, but I think he knows my history, but I do give him a project description, and eventually he signs it. So, pretty simple.
Any other questions? All right. Going right along.
The next item on the list is campground approval through the Minnesota Department of Health. I think Sarah, you're going to cover this, and Carla might have something to add too.
Yeah, so based on the conversation that we had this morning, again, just reiterating that the plan needs to go through Minnesota Department of Public Health for a plan approval, and then once the campground is complete, there would be a licensing
process that would need to be followed before receiving final reimbursement. So from a grant standpoint, that is what we are looking for, is that the plan has been approved and that there is appropriate licensing at the close of the grant.
Yeah, I would just maybe suggest working at your local Department of Health level first. In my area, we're more strict than the state. So we have our own restrictions that are more restricted than the state. So knowing those restrictions up front will help your plan, will help make the process a little easier. They can then help you with the state level permit and plans. But just be aware that your own local health department might be more strict than the state level. So it's good to know that.
Any questions? Yes, in the back.
Carlin, can you give us some examples of what those restrictions would be that you encounter?
Yeah, a lot in our area has to do with like proximity of bathrooms and the water quality and things like that. Being in a highly karst area, the water quality is a bigger deal to us. So the amount of testing that you have to do and where some of the water sources are at, things like that are what we're looking at more.
Did I see another hand?
Getting back to this morning's discussion on accessible sites, and the MDH has guidelines, or they have, I've seen that table. Is there a new or separate one from the DNR?
It should be the same, but if you want to request it from us, we can send you the table that we have that has the number of required sites by camping unit. So we have it on file, we can easily send it.
And I think that was probably the same chart that we went through with one of our workshops, our online accessibility workshops earlier this year too, so.
Yes, it is, yes, most likely.
That helps make sure your handicap sites are built correctly with the right widths and all the right measurements around your fire pits and everything, so.
So what we're referring to is at one, I forget which of the workshops it was, but on our website, on our accessibility page, we did have one of our workshops dealing directly with campgrounds. So if you want to learn more about accessibility in campgrounds, feel free to look that one up and you'll learn a whole lot in about an hour. So, Roger.
Yeah, just some feedback that we've received from campsites that we've designated as ADA. The requirements include a paved surface for navigating, and we made the mistake of only paving the actual camping pad that the individuals would park on, and neglected to consider that the more important paving would be not where the vehicle is parked, but where the individuals are going to be moving around.
To the fire pit and among other things, picnic table, yeah.
Something that I learned in that was that they don't actually want you to label them ADA, just to label them accessible.
Yep.
Do not label them ADA.
Any other questions on campgrounds? All right. Oh, Joe.
Actually, no, maybe there's a past director of environmental services over there. Now, is there if you're building a campground, I don't have one, so I don't really know, but is there some approval you need from the zoning office, numbers and the septic folks? Carlin, did you happen to know that?
Yes, you'll definitely have to go through your planning and zoning department too, or, public health has some say in that as well. Because where you have your septic in relation to your water sources and proximity to campsites, you can only have your restrooms a certain distance from any particular campsite. Things like that will be part of your planning and zoning.
All right. The next item, and I think, Jenny, I think we're going to turn over to you, talk a little bit about the review process, project reports, and then we'll probably pitch in a little bit from the commission side as well.
Sounds good. So I think as mentioned earlier that annually we are required to collect, let me start over guys, sorry. on an annual basis, we have to collect written status reports. So we send these out every fall. We've shifted them to October. That is a little bit changed. We used to send them in January or in December with the due date in January. We've moved that up a little bit to October. But this is something that we're required to do from the Office of Grants Management within the state of Minnesota. And when we send those out, we will put Renee in copy. We just ask that you keep Renee in copy when you send the responses, because this also feeds into their reporting as well. And the other thing I was going to add is we also have so we have our annual written status reports, and then we also have monitoring requirements. So if you have a grant that's over $250,000, we also have to do annual monitoring, which is in addition to the annual written status reports. Currently, we have some flexibility on what this looks like. If we're out in your area, we might do a progress inspection visit and kind of send you the findings and be like, do you have notes? Did we miss something? Do you concur or disagree? We might just shoot you an email or give you a phone call and check in on how things are doing. So just keep in mind that those are kind of like the couple ways that you might see us. And that is all in addition to the final inspection report that we do for every project. Or final inspection visit. Thank you. Final inspection visit? Okay, so when your project is nearing completion, it is a great time. Don't wait until it's actually complete. Renee, Joe, Charlie, Sarah, and I are in the field a lot in the spring, summer, and fall. So the earlier you can let us know that it's nearing completion to get something scheduled really helps us out a lot. So the final inspection visit will be on site with you and anyone else from the project that should be there, your DNR grants manager, and then either Renee or Joe from the commission. And we'll walk through every component of the grant and make sure everything was done according to plan. We'll also check to make sure critical components are accessible. So that's your restrooms, drinking water, parking, and bathrooms. So if any of those are available within your project area, we'll make sure that those are provided as well.
So right now, at this time of year, if you know that you basically have a punch list to complete in the spring, reach out to us and give us ballpark timeframe that you would like to schedule a final, so we can get our travel schedules coordinated too, as best as we can. But right now, it's a great time to think ahead to spring and summer when we'll be traveling, and just get on the calendar.
I forgot to mention, we also check for funding signs at final inspection visits. So who has that sign up in front? Yep. Thank you. So we will now also be checking that sign, as well as the Clean Water and Legacy Amendment sign, is posted for the project. And if you have any other prior state funding in your park, we'll also check for that too. So a lot of these parks have prior other outdoor rec grants in them, so.
Yeah. So from the commission side, we also are looking forward to that reporting. As Jenny said, please include us, Renee in particular, on the carbon copy of that email when you are sending in that report. There may also be times, depending on where you're at in the cycle and where we're at with our needs, where Renee may send out a report request to you directly to our system, not through the DNR. That's our own data collection that we look forward to, and it sort of helps us keep in touch when you may be at a critical point in your project to make sure that you are moving ahead and that you will be successful. One of the things that we talked about earlier in the day is that we all have timelines that we have to meet as a part of our project. There's a 3-year timeline to achieve this project, spend the dollars, get it completed. If any of that may not be met, if your project may run long, or you're short, or you have extra dollars, which does happen both ways occasionally, let us know either through a report or just contacting us. The sooner you let us know about where you're at with your project and how those things are going, the earlier we can react. And even if you think you're going to have dollars left over, that's really important, because we want to work with you to find a way to capture those dollars in your project and make sure that those dollars are spent. Because if we get to the end of a project and you have, say, $100,000 left that we didn't know about, and your timeline is up, we may not get those dollars back into our system. We won't. So make sure you let us know how your project is progressing. And this is also to reemphasize a point we made earlier in the day. Reports are a great way to send us pictures that we can use in reports or wherever, social media, what have you. So keep those good pictures coming. Some of you have gotten really good at either your own photography, Roger, or bringing in a professional. So we really appreciate those pictures, especially if they have people in them. Maybe not the vault toilet ones that Renee loves, but
It can be a line outside waiting tables.
so thank you for that, and we just want to make sure that that's clear. More reports, if you got something to say, don't feel you have to wait for the next annual report to come in. All right?
I think making sure that they're aware that you may need an extension is very important to know early on. Even if it's just like that inkling. Like last summer I said, Renee, our bathroom house is 6 months out further than we thought it was going to be. We thought we should still be good, should still be able to install it in the fall, but there's a potential where we might not be able to get it all done within that 3-year period. Well, bathroom house is still not installed right now. So, you know, we need to know legislatively if it's going to be needing an extension, so we have to know pretty early on that that's going to have to go onto the slate for legislature to be approved. So it can't be a last minute March or April extension request. So you have to know maybe a year or so in advance of that inkling that you might have an extension so that it can go through the entire process. So that's really important.
Yeah, it's important to know that the DNR can't just say, okay, we're going to extend your project. It is, as Carlin said, a legislative process, so it has to go through a session. We have 5 going through this year. So 5 projects that just need a little bit of extra runway. Some will need maybe 3 months and some will need an extra year. These are for 2-year extensions, so do let us know soon. And when you have dollars left over in the project, we want you to spend every one of those dollars. So even if it's only $100, I mean, by all means, ask us where else you can spend those dollars within that project if it wasn't part of the original scope, because there's no good to be had from sending it back out there because it trickles from the very top of the legacy all 4 funds down to us, and by the time money gets down to the smallest fund with the smallest allocation, which is Greater Minnesota, there's not much left. So we'd much rather see those funds spent on your project to improve something.
Dave?
At what point does the 3-year clock start?
It always ends June 30th of the 3rd year. So even if your contract doesn't come in because you're working on some of these other things, it always ends on June 30th of that 3rd year. So if you're getting funding for next summer, your contract could start as early as July 1st of 2026. You're going to have June 30th of 27, 28, 29. 2029, June 30th. Okay, great question.
Yeah, that would be.
Not necessarily where the contract comes in.
Right.
So
The
the
clock
funds-
starts the first day of when the funds are encumbered, which would be on July 1 of this year for your project. That's when the clock starts.
Whether or not we have a contract.
Whether or not you have a
Right.
contract does not matter. It starts on July 1st of the year that you get that grant.
It's the life of the funds that we can contract through. So if the funds need to be extended, then we can extend the contract, but we can't until the funds are extended.
Okay, any other questions? Anything else from the panel on this?
Except for if you have lottery in lieu funds, then you have 2 years.
That's right.
Sorry.
It's a good reminder.
But we would let you know that. So a majority of the projects are going to be 3 years. Greater Minnesota has now started receiving a different pot of funding that is only valid for 2 years. We work with Renee and Joe to identify which projects can be moved faster. So a lot of the acquisition grants and things like that If you have that different deadline, we will let you know, so it's clear. I just don't want everyone to assume it's 3 years.
And just so you're not concerned, that 2-year timeline for that pool, we try and pick projects that will match that timeline. So if you have an acquisition or something that can be done quickly, that's what we'll target for those funds, so.
Yes, because those 2-year funds cannot be extended.
So why don't you roll on to the next item there?
Great. Okay. I get the fun task of talking about funds and match spending. So hopefully everyone in the room is aware, no funds or match can be expended until there is a fully executed contract. So any projects incurred before the contract start date are ineligible, so that would include any of those pre-contract items if you're working on those. So you talked about they must be completed prior to contract execution, except for in those cases that Lisa mentioned earlier where we do give a special award condition. This may include some of your design and engineering costs, so if you are working on some design costs to get some of those pre-contract items, if they're before the start date, they would not be eligible. And if anything's before the project start date, it's not ineligible for both reimbursement and match. So anything we're talking about is reimbursement and match. We allow up to 4 reimbursements throughout project implementation. So over those 3 years, as cash flow and work happens as you see fit, you can submit up to 4 reimbursement requests. On each reimbursement request, I think I mentioned this earlier, we hold the required match percentage. Match is prorated if a grant is underspent. That's, as Renee mentioned, use those dollars, talk to the commission early if you know that's gonna happen so you can start getting some of those other items in your 5-year plan. If that were to happen and the commission approved a resolution to add new scope of work, we would then process a contract amendment so that work is included. So back to match, if a grant has a match of 10%, only 90% of expenses can be reimbursed, even if the grant is underspent. And on each reimbursement request, we'll be reimbursing 90% of total eligible costs. Talked about that one. I think I mentioned earlier, holding match on each reimbursement just helps mitigate any need to pay back to the DNR if there is an underspend at the end, so it just kind of helps with some of that situation going on. But hopefully now we're getting those dollars back into the grant as much as possible. As Renee mentioned, and as Carla mentioned, if you have an inkling that it's gonna need an extension, just go for the extension. You can finish the project early once it's extended. That's not a problem. So if you have the inkling of like, this could be really cutting it close, I think everyone would say like, just go for the extension rather than causing some of that stress and headache. In the off chance that something unexpected happens and work does need to finish a little bit past the end date, that is okay. We can do the final inspection visit after that June 30th date if we need to. We do ask that it try to be completed by August. That's when our hard close for our finances happen, so we want everything in by then. So if you think it's going to be cutting it close, but you can't guarantee August, go for the extension. The other thing would be to know is that if there are any work that's done after that June 30th date, though, that those costs are, again, ineligible for reimbursement and match because they're after the June 30th end date. For anything to be eligible, it has to be incurred by June 30th. That was a lot, sorry. I think I covered everything.
That was fantastic, though. Any questions on reimbursement, contract time links, anything like that? All right, okay.
I just got a comment, Joe.
Yeah.
So you still can start your checklist early, just don't spend any money. So just keep that in mind. And then I just wanted to highlight that you are only allowed 4 reimbursements. And again, I'm gonna talk about my situation is we're a small organization. It's hard for us to cover huge amounts of money, but you just gotta be careful and strategic in your requests. So you gotta kind of think about when it's best to ask for a reimbursement. Yeah, those are my comments.
And I think we also agree that don't try and put it in as one request at the very end as well. I think it works out better if we do have at least a couple of requests as we go through the project for reimbursement there. Did we talk about that? Okay. We've got one last one here. Sarah, and I think I will cover some of this. This is about the Americans with Disabilities Act and the standards and guidelines. Do you want to talk through, Sarah, some of what you did, and then we'll probably get Steve to step in a little too.
Yeah. So this will happen at the final inspection where Jenny and Charlie and I will come out for a final, and we will make sure that the minimum ADA standards are covered. That is our review. I know that there is an ask and maybe a light expectation from the commission that we exceed the basics, but in order for us to close the grant, we are making sure that there is at least a minimum compliance with ADA. Specifically, if we're talking about a park, or if we're talking about a trailhead, that there are access routes to all facilities. Whether it was really the subject of your project or not, all facilities should have access routes. If a park or a trailhead offers the critical components of drinking water, restrooms, or parking, they must be accessible as well. So if offered, then they must be. That said, if we are doing a final inspection on a project that is phased and about to move into another project, if there isn't an access route to a facility because the facility is either going away in the next phase or it's going to be renovated, we're not going to ask folks to do an expense of putting in an access route for something that they're about to tear out. So those are all things that we would be discussing at the final inspection. That's why it's important to have Joe or Renee there, because they kind of know your plans more than we do. And so those are all things that are to be discussed, but on a high-level, general basis, we are looking for ADA compliance.
A little bit about your project.
Okay. Again, with our project, if you've ever seen Barn Bluff, it's kind of hard to miss it when you drive into Red Wing, but it basically has a 300-foot elevation change from the base to the summit, and 99% of the people come to climb the bluff to get up, see the views of Lake Pepin. You can some days see up to Minneapolis on a good clear day and see the town below in the Mississippi River, the floodplain. And so creating an ADA environment for us is basically impossible. And so our goal was to create a new visitor entry point that would allow as many people as possible that can't assess the summit to be able to learn about the bluff and learn about its history. See, we have photos of the summit. We have letters from Thoreau from when he visited Red Wing many, many years ago, all at the base. And our last project that you're kind of looking at here is our lime kiln project, where we have this 1882 lime kiln that's been basically abandoned since 1909 when the city took over the bluff. That one died. Listen, do not like me. And so since 1909, it's been a city park, and this project must be my electric.
You want to kill another? Doing great. Keep going.
Let's try this one. And so the structure was back there and it needed some help. We got some grants again through the Minnesota Historical and Cultural Grant Program to actually preserve it, study it, preserve it, make sure it wasn't a danger to folks. And we wanted to add it to the park features that, and it's very important in Red Wing heritage preservation, and a lot of people come to Red Wing because of our heritage preservation efforts. And here we had one of these last remaining lime kilns in Minnesota, and unless you're going by on the Amtrak on your way to Chicago, you couldn't really see this structure, even knew it was back there. And so this project expanded on our welcome plaza to bring an ADA trail back, but to also put an elevated ramp and viewing platform in front of the kiln so people could get a close-up view of it and learn about it. So it include interpretive panels and everything. And so everything was designed to make sure we were at the right grades, the cross slopes, that our ramp had landing pads halfway up, because we were climbing probably about 12 feet in elevation to get up there. It also was a safety item for us, because most people who wanted to get a good view of the kiln would crawl up onto the Canadian Pacific Railroad and stand in the middle of the tracks on a very busy turn and take their photos, and the railroad didn't really care for that so much. So I think the photos up here kind of show what we did, but we tried to make this as compliant as possible for ADA and make it as welcoming for everybody as we could, knowing that most people with a disability are not going to be able to make the summit. We weren't going to put in elevators or electric lifts up the side, and that would really create some other issues working with Kelly here and whatnot, and historic preservation standards. So yeah, that's just kind of an example of how we were able to do it, but knowing we couldn't provide access to the majority of the park, which is quite large.
I think they all work.
Go ahead. Any of our other panelists want to talk a little bit about accessibility and your experiences with it?
I guess one of the bigger accessibility projects we've worked on is natural playgrounds, and those all nodding heads. Yes, it can be difficult in a lot of different areas of our parks, but natural playgrounds are also one that we dealt with, and we brought in someone from our local community to kind of go through our plan with us, talk to us about what it meant to be able to make this accessible. And part of their big thing was not every single component has to be accessible, but a majority of it should be, and just thinking about substrates and what you can and can't use, and then going back to finding a majority to be accessible by wheelchair, but also accessible in a lot of different other ways. I mean, there's a lot when it comes to accessibility that is not just wheelchairs. So really there are local specialists available if you can find them. But again, the commission is also getting much better about providing those resources and making things available as far as online resources and places to kind of look at some of those things. But it's good to have a local expert to kind of walk through that with you and be in your space and looking at what you're trying to accomplish, and just kind of giving you little tweaks here and there as far as what you can accomplish. So yeah, but we know not 100% can be accessible all the time. We just have to make our best effort to make it accessible.
And that's where I kind of wanted to talk from the commission's perspective as well, why we work so hard to to have inclusivity and accessibility as a key foundation of all of our funding processes and what we're trying to accomplish as a part of our vision. All of us here in this room are stewards of the public good, of public land, of public facilities, and of the public interest. We're here to provide, thank you to dollars that our citizens voted in, provide facilities that are accessible for all those citizens. So when we talk about accessibility, when we talk about inclusivity, yes, the minimum AD standards are something that we're all trying to even learn and get really good at and do a better job of. But we're also encouraging you to take steps beyond that. Think about your signage. How does that tell people what is accessible or what might be obstacles for them out there? Talk about other forms of language barriers or other disabilities that may be a part of whoever's visiting your facility. How do we help them to experience what we're trying to provide here for them as far as outdoor recreation? So our commission is very big at that. We were even just talking about yesterday, how do we continue to improve that message, and with our inclusion statement, make that something stronger that we can provide for you, and hopefully that feeds back into what you're able to achieve beyond what you've even thought about. So think carefully about that, reach out to us, let's keep talking, let's figure it out. I love Carlin's perspective on reaching out to local members of your community who can help you to interpret for your site and for your community what that accessibility might mean, which is an important part of public engagement for all of our facilities. Reach out to all of those underrepresented communities that may not use your facility. Find out what they need. How do we make it inclusive for them? So think about that. That's just what we wanted to emphasize as part of wrapping up this segment of the program today. And before we wrap up officially, one last chance. Are there any additional questions out there before we go today? Yes, Roger.
I just have a comment in terms of accessibility, that one of your best local experts are your adults that are in some kind of a daycare, adults with disabilities center, inviting them to your space and see how they use it and interact it. That can be some of the best feedback that you can get.
I'll add on to that. We just did a very large community engagement sessions, but it can be as simple as a quick survey of what does accessibility in the parks mean to you, because we had a very expansive responses that was far beyond sensory, wheelchair. There were some things that I was like, I never even thought of that. Sun sensitivities, so have more night programs, things like that that you just may not think of. So let your community think of it for you and let you kind of know what they're thinking about. So yeah, it's a quick and easy way to just throw out a quick survey to your community and ask them what's some of your accessibility problems to our parks.
All right, well, we've got an exciting time today. Really want to thank our panel for sticking with it and providing all this information. Thank all of you for taking the time, come here even if you weren't required to. I hope you learned a lot and were able to walk away better prepared for your next project. I would like to invite our Executive Director, Renee, to come up and give you some final closing thoughts.
Well, it does, Steve. Joe said it all. You know, we're grateful you're here. We're hoping that you're going to apply for grants for next year. If you aren't part of this process because you achieved a grant for this year, the portal, as Joe said, opens up on April 1st. It closes on July 31st. That should give you ample time to apply for a great project. We expect about $12.5 million to be available in the next granting cycle. Because we're always a year ahead, we can't guarantee that's the amount, but we think it's going to be right around there. And that will continue to grow and give people in Minnesota and our visitors wonderful opportunities to avail themselves of our parks and trails and really enjoy the things that I don't think any of us could do on our own without this gift of legacy. So as you talk to people going forward, remind them that this is going to be coming up for renewal in 2032. It's not a given. We're very hopeful that it does, but we want to continue this really amazing gift that we've given ourselves to be able to enjoy our parks, our trails, our cultural heritage, our natural heritage, arts and council. It's terrific. So thanks for all being here today.